So welcome to this Royal Society of Edinburgh signature event. My name is John Ball. I'm the president of the Royal Society of Edinburgh, and many thanks to the University of Aberdeen for hosting this occasion. So I have to make a couple of housekeeping notes. There's no planned fire alarms, so should there be a fire alarm, then follow the staff to wherever they lead you. The event is being live streamed, so it's being photographed and recorded. So these Royal Society of Edinburgh signature events are designed to educate and encourage new thinking, ideas and conversations. And the event aims to amplify the RSC's mission of knowledge made useful, which is from its charter more or less, and by enhancing our understanding of national and global scientific, cultural and economic topics. So this meeting is going to be chaired by Professor Neil Vargason, who's a fellow of the Royal Society of Edinburgh and holds the chair in developmental biology at the University of Aberdeen. So I hand over to him to introduce our speaker.
Today, it's good to see so many people here in Aberdeen, and I gather there's quite a few people online as well, which is great. So we're delighted to have Robert here. We've got about an hour, and it's a fireside chat. So I'm gonna ask Robert some questions. He's gonna hopefully answer them, and then we'll open it up and. So by way of a quick biography, Robert is a political veteran and a communications expert who's advised many different corporations around the world. He was an intern for President Clinton at one point, has advised senators, and I also found out that you were a president of the US Senate Press Secretaries Association. And at one point, and you have been named one of the 50 most powerful people in Washington, D.C. for 9 years.
Lies.
So he's now head of global public affairs at Meta. So it's fantastic to have him here. And as I say, we'll start this conversation off, and hopefully we'll delve into your career and into equality, diversity, and inclusion. So the first question. Thanks for being here in Scotland. And it's important to talk about you and your journey. So where are you from in the States, and how did you get to be where you are?
Well, first, good evening, and thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's good to see all of you, and also all of you who are at home or on your smart device. Thank you very much to the RSC for having me. It's also thank you very much to the University of Aberdeen, my alma mater. So very fortunate to be here. I'm from the state of Pennsylvania, or we call it the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I was born just outside of Philadelphia, in the suburb. My parents grew up in the inner city of Philadelphia. My parents actually grew up right across the street from each other. So I was one of those rare people that when I went to see my grandparents literally lived across the street from each other. So it was a little weird, but anyway. But my parents actually wanted a better life for their kid. My father was a freshman in college, and my mom was a senior in high school. So out came me, and they decided for the good of everything that my mom would finish high school and that my father would drop out of college. So in many ways, I'm actually living my parents' story in many ways. But the reason why I mentioned moving to the suburbs is because we were the first and only African Americans on our block. In fact, in the whole neighborhood for the first, this was back in 1974, 75. I was born in 74, we were in 75. And so we were the only ones for the most part for the first 10 years. So in many ways, I'm very, very, very comfortable being the only one in the room, the only person of color in the room, at least at that time. I remember very vividly sometimes being on the school bus and kids would take their hand and put it through my hair to feel a little bit more thicker hair. So anyway, my story is, I think, pretty unique in many ways, but also uniquely American in so many different ways. So.
Okay. And your connection to Aberdeen, you mentioned this is your alma mater.
Yeah. So, make a long story short, I actually wanted to be a medical doctor, which we can talk about later if you want to. But nevertheless, one of my dear friends was, he actually graduated from here, was a dear colleague of mine at Georgetown University. And so I'm a bit of an Anglophile. I really, really do enjoy British royal history, but I'm also a big Cold War buff as well. And so I wanted to study the special relationship, as we call it. And that's the relationship, as you probably know, between the United States and the United Kingdom. And so the person who was actually studying that too at the time, or researching that at the time, was Tom Weber, who's still here at the university. So he and I just hit it off. And my interest, specifically, I have a theory. And my theory is that the late Queen Elizabeth II actually was much more influential behind the scenes than we actually know. We see her as in pearls, waving with a little white glove. But my theory is that she, with so much knowledge, she actually was girl power before there was a thing called girl power. Remember, you don't remember this, but in 1952, she was the only female head of state in the world at that time. And she had the benefit of being on the world stage for almost 70 years, more than 70 years. And so this was before Margaret Thatcher. This was before Nancy Pelosi. This was before Kamala Harris. This was way before that stuff. Anyway, my point all this is that my theory is that she actually influenced things behind the scenes more than we'll know. So I digress.
Cool. So, you've mentioned before that you like storytelling.
I do.
And so what do you mean by this?
So
Storytelling, but also why you like to do storytelling.
Yeah, so I guess I would answer this question in two ways. One, I'm a firm believer, I'm an empathetic leader. And what I mean by that is that I really I try to lead from behind. And I also recognize that all of you, your ancestors, the people that came before you, the people that come after you, we're all leaders in our own way. And how we show up to leadership is unique to us. I call it the moral compass in many ways. And my point all this is that we all have a story. No matter who you are, we're humans. And we all have different and unique backgrounds. And that's what makes us, that's the strength of diversity. And that is the strength of the human race. And so telling your story is incredibly important. And just as important is listening to that story and having empathy to be able to relate to that story. Or quite frankly, to have the vulnerability that says, wow, I've never been on a school bus and someone to rub their hands through their hair out of curiosity. I've never been the only person in the room where I happen to be a person of color, whatever. So my point is, we all have stories, and I love telling stories. I'm a communicator at heart. Can you tell? So I really enjoy telling stories, telling other people's stories from a political standpoint, but also listening stories.
Okay, cool. So before we dive deeper into EDI, or equality, diversity, and inclusion, what's your definition of leadership?
Wow. So it's a little complicated, but let me go back to moral compass. So I believe that anyone that has a beating heart, like this guy over here, right? My grandmother used to have this saying, Robert, always do what's right, but do it when no one else is looking. Because the most important thing is to always do the right thing, and whether you get the credit or not is irrelevant. And my point in all this is that we are all leaders, and so how we show up to this classroom, how we show up to a board meeting, how we show up to the person that is taking an order at McDonald's means something. And the most heartfelt, meaningful things to me is when people will say, I had this the other day, I was actually in California for a meeting, and I was blown away. I was getting off the airplane, and the flight attendant grabbed my hand, and she said, thank you. And I said, for what? She said, you probably don't remember this. She goes, well, you were on my flight last month. I didn't recognize her. And she said, I actually dropped a cart of food or whatever. I do remember this part. And she goes, you got out of your seat, you actually helped me. And I just said, you're welcome, but that's what you're supposed to do, right? And she said, you have no idea how many people would not do something like that. That's the stuff that's meaningful for me. Because one, it made a lasting impression for her, although I didn't know that at the time, but also two, she remembered it. And hopefully, I don't know this, we won't know this, right? Is that someone else saw me do that, and maybe we'll think twice and maybe do something like that in the future when no one else is looking.
Yeah, yeah. So, in your opinion, what makes a good leader?
Someone that's empathetic, someone that listens, one of the things that I know a lot, I have opinions, but I try not to talk a lot in meetings. I try to listen to other people's point of view. And oftentimes, the feedback that I've gotten, which is good and bad, is that, Robert, you just freaking ask the question. You don't give context. And that's true. I don't want to hear myself talk in that context. Just get to the question and let the other person answer it. And so I think for me, being a good leader is showing up in a way that's empathetic, showing up in a way where you're listening more than talking to the extent that you possibly can, having the emotional intelligence to the extent that you can to do the right thing when no one else is listening. And I'll keep going back to that because that's incredibly important. So I'm extremely conscious to interrupt someone when they're presenting. I try to give them my full attention. To the extent that I can, I actually put my phone down and I'm fully present. And so those little things like that, to me, is incredibly important. But the listening part I go back to is because I want to learn from you. I'm in the room. I'm fortunate enough to be in the room with you. And by the way, it doesn't matter whether or not, if that's the fire alarm, we'll follow you. It doesn't matter whether or not this person has a suit and tie on or not. In fact, I would make the argument that it's actually more important for the person who's wearing the postal uniform. Because that's my dad, who's a postal, who actually studied to be a mechanical engineer, who's actually one of the most smartest person that I hopefully is watching us now. My dad. I'm going to get a little emotional, so sorry about that. He's actually one of the most smartest people that I know. Smartest people that I know. But he couldn't finish a college education because they had me. So, and he wore a uniform, a postal uniform for 30 some odd years. So anyway, my point is that in the flight attendant, like, so people like that in my mind are the ones that are arguably the most deserving of respect and the most deserving of hearing their story.
So we'll delve a bit deeper then. So you've often talked about having a hard or a difficult conversation in the workplace. So what do you mean and how do you go about that in a way that's a good experience for the person you're talking to, but also for yourself?
So at Facebook, we call it hard conversations. I work for a technology company, not at Facebook. And we call it a hard conversation because it can be a hard conversation. And we actually have those conversations in real time. So it's not, we don't wait 3 months or 6 months later during a review. And the reason why is because we feel as though is that memories fade, recollections may vary. People may stew a little bit in their heads about whatever happened 6 months ago, and it could just escalate more than it needs to. So it very well could. I had this happen. I mentioned this a couple of hours ago, and that is, I was actually giving a presentation, and I was literally in mid-sentence, and the person kept interrupting me more than once. It was not just a casual interruption; it was a little deliberate. So I, in that moment, said, Neil, I actually gave you the common courtesy to listen to you while you were speaking. If you wouldn't mind giving me the same respect. And then afterwards, I'd love to have a candid, hard conversation with you. So addressing it in the moment, it's nothing new. Let me be clear, it's being very respectful and diplomatic, but it's addressing it in the moment. Because one, you're giving, if you don't, you're allowing that person license to over-empower you. And that's not fair to you. You have a voice as well. It's your story that you're telling in that moment, right? Secondly, what you're doing is you're setting the boundaries with respect to something that's appropriate and what's not appropriate. And then having the hard conversation afterwards. I would say, Neil, I'd love to talk about why you interrupted me a couple times and get you to respond. It very well could be, Robert, I'm hard of hearing. Okay. That's good to know. It could be I'm on medication and makes me interact a certain way. Okay. Or it could be, and this it could be, I'm really sorry. I just had a lot to say, and I needed to get it out. Well, that's not okay. And so addressing it in that moment, you have a voice, but in this moment, right, that's what a conversation is all about. A conversation typically is a two-way street, right? A conversation is allowing me the opportunity to express myself in a way that gives me equity, that gives me dignity, and that gives me respect. Because, by the way, my silence, when you were telling your story, is the reciprocity that I gave you. So if this is going to be an equal conversation, so please allow me the opportunity to have my ability to be able to speak in the space where I need to be spoken. So anyway, that's just what it is. And we have hard conversations often, and it very well could be is, hey, I thought we talked about this. Why did you show up in the meeting this way? What are you talking about? Well, you said in the meeting X, Y, and Z. That's not what we agreed upon. So anyway, my point all this is not to belabor is that it's incredibly helpful feedback. I believe that feedback is good. I believe that being transparent and really addressing with not emotion, but with examples is incredibly important. Incredibly.
But it must be difficult to do that, and you're going to have some people that will react, in a protective way for themselves and get quite aggressive. I mean, how would you deal with that?
Yeah, so I would aggressive, maybe defensive, definitely, because that's not natural. What I find oftentimes is people, usually women, and usually people of color, will say this. I'm so sorry. What do you apologize for? So it's almost as if you have to be comfortable with yourself. And this is why I think it's incredibly important to have examples, because I try to do two things when I have these hard conversations with my team and also colleagues, is to de-escalate the situation. It's never to personalize it, and always bring it back to the example. And this goes back to addressing it in the moment so that memories are somewhat aligned around what happened. That's incredibly important. But let me be clear, I'm not suggesting that this is easy. Oftentimes it's very difficult, because to have that hard, that's why we call it a hard conversation, because it can be awkward, it can be off-putting, but I like to think that it's refreshing. Some say medicine, it tastes disgusting going down, but hopefully you feel better afterwards. Not always.
Okay. So we move on to diversity. So you've talked about baking diversity into job descriptions.
There we go. Hello. Now we can sing.
So
is this for both of us?
Just for you for now.
Just
I think your mic's a bit.
Okay.
There you go.
Here we go.
So can you give us an example of how to bake diversity into a job description?
Yeah, is this better? So baking a diversity into a job description is actually two things, at least how I'm used to doing it. First is at the bottom of the job description, saying that we value diversity, saying that we look forward to this, saying that, that's something that's obviously boilerplate language, right? But meaning it. And what I mean by that is that baking that into your job description by saying, having a passion for diversity, having a passion for hard conversations. I'm looking forward to diverse opinions, we are looking for someone that embraces this. So it's really giving a lot of license, even before the job description, is saying that in order to even qualify for this job, you need to really understand the culture of the organization. And this is a culture that we're really, really looking forward to diversity. And I want to be clear because I think in this day and age, diversity has gotten, I don't want to use the word watered down, but diversity it's a broad term. And that's on purpose, right? So it is obviously diversity of religion and skin tone and backgrounds, but it also could be diversity of thought. It also could be diversity from a geographical standpoint. So I was, when I landed here, I was at passport control. And the person said to me, "Oh, you're American, are you?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, there's some good Americans out there." And I get it. It's a little bit of sense of humor. And she said, "Well," and she asked me how long I was here, all the standard questions. And I told her I was leaving, obviously on one Friday morning. And she said, "Oh, well, hopefully you'll find a good Scottish girl here." And she said, and she goes, us Northeastern Scotland, they're better than the other ones." And I leaned into her and I said, "Ma'am, a couple things I want to let you know." I said, I'm sure, I'm not speaking from experience. I said, but I'm sure all girls are girls, and I don't think it should be a Northeast Scottish thing. And I said, and secondly, I said, it's just really not my cup of tea. And she looked at me. She goes, "What do you mean?" And I said, "You have a line that's waiting to get their passport." I said, "We'll just leave it at that." So my point is that even that I assume it was a joke, but there was a couple of assumptions that she was making there, right? So a couple of assumptions I believe she was making was that I was heterosexual, which I'm not. I believe she was making the assumption that even if I was, maybe who knows, but even if I wasn't, that a Northeastern, I don't know what that means, but I think I can surmise that a Northeastern Scottish girl is nicer, better, different, better quality than someone else. I mean, come on, that's ridiculous, right? On so many different levels. So there's a lot of assumptions there. That's not good.
So following on from that a little bit then, so we talk about making sure that you've got diverse members in your groups.
Yeah.
So how do you proactively source candidates that are diverse in your group, for example?
So I think that's a good question. So we have a thing called find, grow, and keep. So, and this is hard work. It's really easy to say, "Oh, we sent resumes out, and we just can't find qualified people." That's a 1970s term, right? In really ways. So what does that look like? So how do you find people, right? So it is showing up in the inner city where my parents grew up. It is showing up in areas where makes you just genuinely uncomfortable, but it's exactly where. So I enjoy being uncomfortable. I actually enjoy being in rooms and in situations and cultures where I'm slightly uncomfortable. Why? Because I'm learning. Is because I'm uncomfortable because this is something that's new to me. It's something that I haven't experienced before. And so what I mean by that is that, we have a thing called HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities in the States. Historically, those are universities that have been underrepresented in many ways. Some of them are in rural areas of the country in the South. Some of them are in areas that are outside of major metropolitan areas. And so most college recruitment doesn't go there. And so when they do go there, it's only just showing up on the day, as opposed to developing a deep and rich relationship with that university over time, so that the relationship is authentic and that story or their story like the back of your hand. And so therefore their story becomes your story and it's intertwined. And so therefore when you show up, first of all, you're not just showing up once a year, you're showing up a couple times a month so that the relationship feels a little bit more authentic. So when you say, "Hey, we're actually hiring for X, Y, and Z," it's a much more fluid conversation. It's actually much more easier than you think. I can't speak to here in Europe, but study after study after study has shown us that when there's an authentic relationship in communities that you don't typically have a relationship with, you actually find to have a rich, deeper applicant pool. And by the way, that applicant pool is not just, it could be people of color, but it very well could be is I'm a single, well, I'm not single, but I'm in a non-traditional relationship. I don't know what it feels like to be a working parent. So that's diversity as well, right? I don't know what it feels like to have a conversation with someone when they have to struggle between whether or not they literally put their kid in daycare or they miss the board meeting. I don't know what that means. I can't, but I can empathize with that, right? So, but having those type of experiences in the workplace is incredibly, incredibly important. Lastly, I probably shouldn't be saying this online, but I'll clean it up a little bit. And that is, I remember not at my current job, at a previous job, where the recruiter said, "Well, we need a young whippersnapper. We need someone that's in their 20s and 30s." And I'm like, oh, "This is so bad." And I said, "Blank, why?" And she said, "Well, we need someone that doesn't have a family, that's going to be working 24 hours, 7 days a week." I said, "Stop. Wrong, on so many different levels." I said, "What we need to find actually is the complete opposite." I said, "What I want to find is the best qualified person." And I said, "Given the skill set and given where we are," I said, "I'm actually looking for finding a new mom or a mom that has a family at home." And she goes, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "I'm really, really interested in having someone on my team that's in their 40s or their 50s I'm interested in having someone in their team that that not only has the gravitas, but just has the real world experience. And by the way, that's a big, 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 big barrier in job descriptions is experience. When you say you want 5 to 10 years of experience in leading a team of 20 people, okay, so you automatically, possibly, could be segregating moms that have decided to build they may have the experience in terms of the skill set, but they may have not have managed a team for 10 or 15 years simply because they've been raising a family for the past 10 or 15 years. So that's discriminatory towards her, right? Or it could be my dad, who was a postal worker who decided to go back to college after his kids went to college in the whole 9 yards, who has no experience in managing people, but has a wealth of experience in other ways. So anyway, my point is that you have to be really careful how you bake job descriptions in many ways, and how you find that's along with your question, how you find grow and keep people. And I can talk about the grow and the keep I know we're running out of time, so I'll pause.
Oh, that's fine. So on a related area then, how do you counteract comments from leadership when they make things like we just hire or promote the best person for the job, regardless of race or gender?
So when I hear that, that sounds right? That's what you want in theory. That's what you want in a utopian society. Raise your hand who lives in a utopia. So that's not real, right? It's a wonderful aspiration. Who doesn't want that? Everybody wants that from an aspirational standpoint. But my lived experience is that's really, really hard to find. So it goes back to my point around you have to deliberately find or try to attract people that are different. And again, that takes a lot of work. It's really, really easy, folks, to say that you want sushi. It's great. And you might be able to find sushi at the Tesco. I don't know how good it is, but you might be able to find it there. But if you really want authentic sushi, you might have to do a little homework, right? You might have to really, really sweat a little bit, and you might have to be uncomfortable going in a place, I don't know where here in Aberdeen, to find authentic sushi. So that takes work. And genuinely, and this myself included, to be clear, we're not very adventurous people. We tend to kind of stay in our lane. We tend to do the thing that we know. We tend to really just follow the script, if you will. And this is where you need to be a little uncomfortable. And this is where you need to challenge yourself because, yes, of course, everyone says that, but I'm not sure how many people mean it. And I'm not sure exactly how many people actually raise their hand and say, I'm going to do the work to find the real authentic sushi.
Yeah, good answer. So related to that, then, you've also said that don't be afraid to allow a voice that may be different to lead a discussion or implement a plan. So how do you encourage those sorts of people to actually come forward and raise their hand?
So I'm a big believer in this. So usually the most quietest person in the room, I myself excluded, usually is the smartest person in the room, usually, or has a lot to say. My experience is that either from a cultural standpoint or some type of other stigma, they feel like they can't really talk as much as they should. So I observe. If it's my meeting that I'm chairing, I'll observe that, and then usually I'll have a quiet conversation with that person on the side, not the day of. I usually do it the day after, and I say I noticed something, and it doesn't make me feel good. If you're comfortable, I would love to learn your story, and I would love to learn why you're quiet. Now, could be a very good reason, but oftentimes, at least in my line of work, it's often my culture. I'm a woman. I have a lisp. I'm from the South, and I have an accent. And my story is the same. I say, you have a voice. I don't particularly care if it has a cadence to it. I don't particularly care, in this case, if you're a woman or a person of color. What I care about is what's in between your two brains. And what I care about is that you feel like your authentic self. And so what does that look like for you? So I throw it back to them. For some, it's thank you, Robert. I now have a little bit of license and equity to be able to tell whatever I need to tell. It could be, oftentimes this is the case, it's, do you mind just calling on me? And then I'll just run from there. Sometimes it's, thank you just for asking the question, because I've never been empowered to do that before. And then usually at the next meeting, I'll just file it away. And then I'll say, Neil, excellent memo. I didn't have, I'm lying, meaning about what I'm about to say. I didn't have a chance to read all of it. I did. Can you summarize what you said? And I actually want you to please leave time for questions afterwards. So I'm giving you the microphone. But I'm setting you up in a way, hopefully, in a way where it feels equitable to you.
Yeah, great answer. Okay, two last questions then. First one is how do you approach conflicts that arise from differences in backgrounds and perspectives in your team?
So hard conversation. And so it depends on the person and the personality, really. What I've found is I'm a very direct person. And what I found is that most people appreciate that about me. They always know, you always know where you stand with me. You will always, my parents are watching, they raised me, so they know this about me, that I'm a pretty transparent person in that way. So I will tell you, I will never tell you how I'm feeling at work, because I don't think that's really relevant. But I will tell you in many, many ways how I'm showing up for work. And that's, to me, that's a difference. So for example, I won't tell you if I'm had a big fight with my partner last night. I won't. I don't think that's none of your business. But I will tell you, hey, listen, I'm not in the right headspace. This morning between 9 and 10, I promise you I will get there. Do you mind just giving me an hour? And the reason why is because I'd love to have a conversation with you about X, Y, or Z. Really, really clear with the example and allowing the person to be able to respond to that. And oftentimes I will say, if it's a hard conversation or a disciplinary thing, I'll say, I recognize that this is a lot of information to process. I recognize that the examples that I gave hopefully are rock solid. But Neil, let's pause. Do you have any feedback for me? The examples that I use are the ones that I can relate to because they directly affected me, Neil. But do you have any examples for me that you'd like to raise? It is 6:30 right now. I recognize that I've been chatting now with these specific examples for about 10 minutes. What I would like to do is pause for about 30 seconds to allow you to gather your thoughts. If you're comfortable, I can leave the room or I can stay. But I really, really want you to have the next few moments to process what I'm saying, because I actually have some steps that I'd like to walk through. Does that feel okay with you? So I'm in control of the meeting, right? I have to deliver a hard message, but I'm allowing you the dignity, I hope. I'm allowing you the grace, I hope. I'm allowing you the platform, I hope, to at least relay your story. I may not agree with it. It may be a hard story, but I'm allowing you that opportunity to be able to do whatever it needs to be done. Now, if this is a termination, which sometimes happens, I will leave the room and I'll come back in and I will thank you for all and I'll be sincere about this, about all the things that I'm sincere about. And then I'll quickly move to, and this is the next steps in terms of what we need to do. I'm really, 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 really sad that it has to come to this, but I'm actually joyful because I think this is an opportunity for you to learn from using the 3 or 4 examples, and then maybe take this as a go forward learning behavior for you. This is not easy. I'm not suggesting that it's easy, but it is something that I do.
Yeah. So last question then from me anyway. So you're clearly very busy. You clearly have an awful lot of things that you're juggling at any one time, and you're talking to lots of people to see how they feel, etc., etc. So what do you do to relax or switch off?
I have a couple things that I do. So I really enjoy photography. So I submit anonymous photographs under a pseudonym. And I've won a couple of awards, and some they're like, this is garbage, which is fine. My partner and I, we have a place. So I'm from Washington. I live in Washington, D.C. I'm from Philadelphia. And there's a place called Cape Cod, which is north of Washington. So we have a house up there. So I do a lot of sailing. And he's a deadhead, a Grateful Dead. So, and I'm a pseudo deadhead. So we listen to a lot of music on the boat with no Wi-Fi.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. And we'll now open up for questions to the audience.
There's lots of questions.
We have time for questions.
Um,
Sorry. And before we ask questions, please put your hand up, and if you could just give us your name as well, just so we know who's asking the question. Thank you.
It's Neva speaking, Neva Heitus. Thank you very much for that. That was really enlightening and very, very well presented. You make it sound as if you have a formula which helps you to get through many of these difficult situations you described. Could you tell us if you had training for this, and if so, what it was, and how else you developed the strategy that you have?
That's a good question. So yes and no. The yes part is yes, I've had training. Facebook is, I think, I'm biased. One of the best, I think, because we had Cheryl Sandberg, our chief operating officer. She's no longer with the company, but she was with the company almost since it started. And she is the author of Lean In. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but this is very much a transformational book around women in leadership and being your authentic self, which really does translate, at least for me, as a person of color, for a person of color leaning in. And what that means is, in many ways, as you probably know, is to lean into a conversation. Don't be afraid to have the conversation. Be specific with examples. Be your authentic self. So anyway, to your question, I have had a lot of training in the Facebook world with that stuff. Been with the company now for 5 years, but prior to that, no training whatsoever. I worked in politics prior to me joining Meta. And so a lot of it's just brute force and lacquer, just old school, honestly, I think it's three things. I think it's formal training. I think some of it has to do with my personality, if I had to be honest with myself. And then a lot of it is Robert and Deborah Traynham that is probably watching right now, my parents.
I'm Morag Beers. I'm the university's Director of Estates. We're going into master planning mode later this year. And I'm kind of curious, as I know some of my colleagues are, what do you see the value in collaborative spaces and being able to take time out of your 9-to-5 job and to interact with other colleagues? And have you seen any good examples of corporate offices where there was collaborative space that worked really well?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And when you say collaborative space, meaning physically or mentally or both? Yeah. So the analogy that I would use is I grew up in a house where the living room was the living room. You know, you brought out the good china for your grandparents. At least my parents did. And the kitchen was the kitchen. The living room was the living room. We were not allowed to sit on the couch unless we had guests. So, everything was very compartmentalized. And so when I go into an office now, no offense, but when I go into an office now and I see cubicles and I see offices and I see the hierarchy of institutions, it's so uninspiring to me in many ways, because I don't know if you've ever been to at least in technology, we have no offices. Everything, we're all equal in that way. We all have the same desk. No one has an office. Our CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, no one in our company has an office. So we all have the same desk. We all have the same chair. And so there's a wonderful equalizing moment there. But in addition to that, think of an open space, open floor plan house where there is no wall for the kitchen, no wall. And so my point is that the collaboration that we do, we all have oversized monitors, and that's done on purpose. One, obviously, to be sensitive to your eyes, but it's also so that you can see what other people are doing, right? And so we have a lot of glass because of the transparency, both mentally and physically. Our offices are always, you see raw concrete in wood that goes halfway up. And the reason why psychologically is because we're never finished. We're still working. Things are in draft mode. So it's an interesting psychological thing. Also in our offices, we have dozens upon dozens of couches in bean bags. I know that sounds cool, right? In some ways, right? But you ever walk into someone's home and you instantly feel welcome? You just the feeling, the aura, the culture, everything, where it's not like you have to ask to sit down in the living room. You can sit because so anyway, the company is very much like that, where it's very, very common. Let's go for a walk to have this meeting. I actually, not to belabor this too much, I actually have a lot of my hard conversations. I deliberately go for a walk with my colleague. I deliberately sometimes will sit Indian style or I will sit lower than them. And the reason why I like to walk with them is because there are no barriers between you and I. You and I are equal in this case, and it's much more collaborative to walk and talk. Sometimes I'm sitting Indian style because I'm going to fire you, but I'm going to do it in a way that's graceful and that's definitely professional. But I'm going to do it in a way that hopefully you feel good. I don't mean to say this. Just as an example, 2 times this has happened to me, where I've let someone go 2 times, and the person has thanked me, and they've said, "I kind of knew this was coming, but you made me feel a certain way." That I want to say thank you back, right? But I'm a little bit, but it's like, okay, hopefully this person is leaving with a little bit of dignity. Hopefully I'm giving a little bit of grace. And to your question, hopefully I'm being an empathetic leader where I'm allowing this person to leave in a way that they still feel a little bit respected. That's the most important thing, at least for me.
Thank you very much, Robert. My name's Owen Cox. Just one question. You mentioned earlier on about your interaction with the young lady on the airplane. I think that sort of leads into the dignity and respect work that's going on at the university. There's also the caring side of what we do. How do we change attitudes across the university on a grand scale to instill that mindset? We can do it on a one-to-one basis. We can have those hard conversations, but I think we need to think a little bit bigger. Thank you.
Yeah, it's hard. It's really hard to scale. I mean, we have 80,000 people in our company, and it's. I'm not suggesting that it's easy, but it does happen one head at a time. My leadership philosophy. So let me talk a little bit about the moral compass, and that is, I call it lead forward. And so the lead forward is you are a leader in the organization. So how do you set the tone? What is that tone, and how do you set that tone? How do you deliver that tone? Because somebody's got to do it, right? And then how do you lead across? And so this is the moral compass. How do you lead across? And that leading across is through your colleagues. How do you show up in a way where if it's your flight attendant colleague, where you stop what you're doing and help him or her? What does that look like for you, right? Use that example. And how do you lead through? And so the lead through is oftentimes the hardest, and that is when you have to deliver hard news, a budget cut, a salary reduction. We're going in a different direction. And so that's equally as hard, right? And how do you lead with empathy? And so this is all part of my moral compass here. And that is, listen, I don't necessarily have all the answers. You too have equity. You too have a voice. And so if I could give you the example is, we're going to go up this mountain. So I'm leading forward. That's my vision. That is how we're going to do it. But the diversity in the room, I have a very strong opinion about how we're going to get to the top of that mountain. But the diversity in the room may say, I think we may want to go this way. Or based on my lived experience, I think we should go this way. Or based on my own disadvantaged background, or whatever the case may be, we really need to think about going this way. And what I mean by that is, what about the person with disabilities? What about the person that has social anxiety? What about the person who grew up in an all-white neighborhood and went to all-white schools, me, and who says, yeah, but we may want to think about it this way. Give you a prime example. I remember I must have been maybe in the 2nd or 3rd grade, and my parents were just going out of their wits end because I was the only child at the time. My parents had me very young, and my brother and sister came 10 years later when my parents got more settled. And my parents were at their wits end because my hair was up to here, and they couldn't find a barbershop to cut my type of hair. So I remember this vividly. I remember my mom was like freaking out, and I remember saying, "Mom, it's okay. I'll find it." She's like, "I'm 7 years old," and I remember going out, and I remember asking my neighbors, and they were like, "This kid is nuts." And then probably Dad, you probably remember this if you're watching. I remember walking around the corner, and I remember seeing someone slightly lighter than me. And I remember saying, my parents are really trying to find somewhere to cut my hair. And I remember him looking at me. He was a police officer, and he said, "Get in the car with me." I would never have done this now, but for a lot of reasons. But this was in the 70s, and he took me to his house and he cut my hair. And I came home, obviously looking like this with no hair. And my dad was like, "Where did you go?" And I said, "I went right around the corner." I said, I forget the guy's name. He goes, "I went around the corner to such and such." And he's a cop. And my dad said, "You did what?" And so we made a friend that day. And but that's me being a little brave. That was me being a little curious. That was me being slightly uncomfortable. But that was also, in many ways, my own little diversity moment, right? And in terms of just trying something that's a little bit different in terms of getting to that mountain. It's probably not the best example, but it's a way of maybe thinking about getting to the top of the mountain through different skill sets.
So did he cut your hair after that as well?
He did. He did. Look, it was just me and my dad. It was my dad and me in terms of people I need to get their haircut in the suburb that we were in. So it was him for quite a bit. Yeah. Do what you got to do. It's called survival.
Thanks. Ibi Yala. I'm from Robert Gordon University, so I just came in to join tonight, so I'm glad to be here. And my question is, how have you navigated through both conscious and unconscious biases on your way to leadership?
That's a good question. I want to show up to your answer with a lot of anger. And I want to show up to your answer with a lot of grace. And the reason why I say that is because it's a complicated answer. Because I have experienced microaggressions. I have experienced conscious and unconscious bias. The grace part comes in the unconscious bias, right? We all have that. Guilty as charged in terms of that's what it is. It's unconscious bias. It's as you all know, it's something where we do that we're not very familiar with. But when it comes to the bias that you can control, that is much more transparent. I call it prejudice. That's a little bit harder. That's a tougher pill to swallow on so many different levels. But to your question, I actually view all of these as teaching moments. I view all of them as moments where I have to be, as hard as it is sometimes, to be not necessarily the better person. I hate that terminology because I'm not better than anyone else. But I do reserve the right to use the terminology, the more graceful person, the more patient person, the person that has a moral compass, that looks at all these opportunities as teaching moments, but also to have the hard conversation. Hey, let's talk about you wagging your finger in my hand. That's not okay. I was when I was in college, I put myself in college by working at a hotel, and so I was a front desk clerk for many years, and I remember very, very vividly a person who doesn't look like me coming up to the front desk, and she took her keys in my hand. No hello, no nothing, no greeting. She just put her keys, our car keys in my hand, and I dropped them. I literally just dropped them dramatically. And she goes, "Why did you do that?" And I said, "Well, because I don't know where your hands have been." And she just gave me the most disgusting look. And she says, "Well, you're supposed to park my car." And I said, "Ma'am, I think I was in college. So this must have been 21, 22. And I said, "Ma'am, good evening. My name is Robert. I am not the valet, but I would be more than happy to introduce you to the valet who can park your car. My job is to make your job as hospitable as I possibly can. So I'd be more than happy to check you in. But before I check you in, would you mind just addressing me as Robert? Can you give me that?" I couldn't believe I said that, but I did. And she just looked at me like with the utmost disgust. And she says, "Robert, check me in." And I said, "I'd be more than happy to." So that's a little bit of the grace, a little bit of anger. I readily admit that I was angry. But also a lot of a teaching, hopefully it was a teaching moment for her. Not in that moment because she was too angry. But hopefully, if she's still alive, hopefully that's a moment where she'll remember, I remember it, where she wouldn't treat someone else that happens to look like me as the valet. So hopefully that answers your question.
Hi, my name's Rachel Elliott. I work in the public engagement with research team at the university. Also a bit of a politics geek. And you've mentioned a few times this moral compass, and I think we can all agree on both sides of the pond that's often missing in our political leaders. It'd be good to hear your reflections on working in Washington, how you think leadership can be improved in politics.
Thank you for that question. So my life is politics in many ways. I stumbled upon, it's a long story of which I can tell you about, but I stumbled upon politics because I wanted to be a doctor. And that is, but to your question, I firmly believe that politics is still, public service is still a very admirable and honorable profession. I do believe that. There's some bad apples. I can give you dozens of bad apples. But I believe that public service is still an admirable profession. But I do believe that because of social media, because of the 24-hour news cycle, we are not as civil as we used to be. There's a lot, at least in America, there's a lot of shouting, a lot of anger. Our previous president, unfortunately, had a lot to do with that in many ways, where he exacerbated, in my view. And so I think just slowing down and having a moral compass and doing what's right when no one else is listening or watching, we're missing that in many ways. And I don't know how you unring this bell because I can give you thousands of examples of social media that is doing the right thing in terms of building community, in terms of connecting people. I mean, thousands of examples, literally. But I can also give you thousands of examples where it's not working, right? And I do believe that the civility or lack thereof is something that is sorely lacking. Treating people with kindness. And by the way, showing up, I do this all the time at my company. I don't agree with this engineer who's going to design X, Y, but I respect you. And so let's figure out how we can find some common ground in a way where we can both lead this conversation or this project, both feeling really, really good. What does that look? Now that's work, really hard work, right? Because I got to listen. I got to show up and listen to another person's point of view that I may not agree with. I got to ask questions, and I have to have the ability and the grace to be able, and the patience, and almost the vulnerability to allow myself to listen to someone who may fundamentally disagree with me. And that's awkward, right? So I'll give you an example of this. Was probably the most uncomfortable thing that I've ever done. And I was working in the United States Senate at the time. This was back in 98 or 99. Some of you probably weren't even born then. And a bunch of individuals from the Ku Klux Klan came to the United States Senate. They didn't have their hood or uniform on, but they self-identified. And they wanted to talk to some senators about, I forget exactly what it was. I raised my hand and I said, I absolutely do not want to sit down and learn from these individuals. That's not going to happen. So, but I do want to go to the meeting and I do want to listen. So they said, are you sure? I said, I'm absolutely sure. I'm absolutely sure. Trust me. So I went to the meeting and of course I couldn't help myself. I asked questions. That was probably the most uncomfortable time that I've ever had. But I only bring this up as an example is because it really did force me to have, I don't know if it was a dialogue, it's too strong of a word, but definitely have constructive communication with people that I just fundamentally disagree with. And I think that's what we're lacking, at least in this society.
Good evening. Excuse me, sorry. My name is Mike Biungu. I empathise with your feeling about the only one on the bus and the hair and all the rest of it. In the Highlands, I know exactly how that works. My question for you is, I've had one experience with an organisation that was very strong on its values. And with them, I spent a lot of time on change management. Excuse me. How do you have a way of recognising what progress you're making in developing the culture you're talking about?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I go back to how feedback is much you give. We over communicate in many ways. So the change, we change a lot. We have a saying called "move fast," and I won't say the rest, but it's basically "move fast." And so my point in all this is that Change management is incredibly hard, incredibly difficult. And the only way that I know how to do that is to over communicate and really just level set by saying, by the way, for the next hour, it's going to be bumpy. Just managing that expectation up front. You have a say. We very much want to hear from you about what direction that we're going, but I want to be really clear with you. I can guarantee you that this change is going to feel really, really uncomfortable. And so the good thing about, at least in the sector that I work in, that's constant. We call it innovation, because if you're not innovating, you're kind of dead in the water in many ways. Fortunately, and I assume that in the university environment, naturally curious people are comfortable with some change, not a lot, but naturally curious people are comfortable with change. But to your point, scaling that and managing that is incredibly difficult, incredibly difficult. The flip side, some of you may know this, but in Silicon Valley, there's a major, major layoff right now going on all across the industry. That type of change is incredibly hard too, right? Because you're losing your job, you're losing your identity for some people, and that's incredibly, incredibly hard. That I'm going through right now, big time. Meaning I have 11,000 of my coworkers at Meta, and I don't know, I think it's like 5,000 at Microsoft. Anyway, there's tens of thousands of this that's happening as I speak. So, thank you.
So we've come to time.
Oh, goodness.
But I do have one last question I'd like to ask you. You've mentioned a few times tonight that you originally wanted to be a doctor. We're in a medical school. You've talked about our friend over here.
Siri.
Yes, Siri. So why did you change?
Yeah. So I'll be very brief with this. So you can tell this is very important to me. So as a kid, I had Achilles tendonitis. It's a medical thing with how you grow really fast in your Achilles. Your bones grow faster than your muscles, so your tissues. So I spent a lot of time with orthopedic surgeons. And so I just fascinated with medicine. I loved being in the doctor's office, not because I was in pain. I loved just everything about it. So I was a pre-med major in college for 2 semesters. I'd be really, really short with this unless you want me to go further. But this was in the winter of 1993. Bill Clinton was just inaugurated president. My college professor at the time gave us an assignment where the best, please write a memo to the president-elect about in the first 100 days in office, how you would change the country. And I didn't give it a lot of thought because I was a pre-med major. So I wrote the memo like the night before. Oh, and she said the best one would be sent to the White House. So I didn't give it a lot of thought. I wrote it the night before. And a couple of days later, she made the announcement that my letter was going to be sent to the White House. Great, fine. Didn't think much about it. And so a couple of months later, I got a call from the White House intern office saying, congratulations, we'd love for you to intern in the White House. And I said, thank you very much, but I'm not interested. I actually want to be a doctor. And she said, we know that, but we would love for you to intern in the White House medical office. I was like, oh, that's cool. I'll do that. So I was so excited. And my parents came, my dad came home and I told him, and he's like, we can't afford this. And I said, okay, I'm a pretty cheerful, optimistic guy. You could probably tell. I said, okay, then we won't do it. And then my mom's like, no, we will do this. We'll figure out a way. So fast forward, got to the White House. I was in the White House medical office for about a month and a half and loved every single moment of it. I loved it. I loved when the president I would never meet him, but I would see his white hair. He would come in, they would take his blood. They would give him his allergy shots. And I loved every minute of it. And so I was asking questions. This is Robert Traynham. I ask questions. This is what I do. And so the White House, my supervisor, the White House doctor, called me in one day. And he said, Robert, this is not working out. I'm 18 years old. He said, I really think this is not the right thing for you. And I'm like, okay, I'm 18 years old. What am I supposed to say to my boss? So I want you to go across the street. This was in the White House. There's the White House and there's the old executive office. But the old executive across the street. I want you to go across the street and I want you to sit down with a person, my colleague by the name of Dee Myers. Dee Myers at the time was the White House press secretary. I didn't know that at the time because I was an idiot. So he says, I'm sorry, this didn't work out, but perhaps maybe my colleague can help you out. I went over to Dee Meyer's office. I was thinking that I was getting fired. I actually thought she was an HR person. No offense. Sorry, Debbie. And so I sat outside of her office. I knew she was important because people were coming out in and out. I could see behind the door, there was like all these banks of television. So I knew she was important. I didn't know she was the White House press secretary. So later on that afternoon, I was sitting there, which felt like hours, but I was sitting there for probably like, I don't know, 45 minutes. And she calls me in and she says, I hear you're pretty good. Okay. I'm just sitting there. You know, she has this huge office, huge desk, and I'm on the other side of it. And I'm looking at her like, oh, okay. And she said, I want you to start tomorrow, Traynham, in the White House press office. You get here at 4 o'clock in the morning. This is 1993. You get to the photocopier. You clip, it's called the clips. You clip all the newspapers, anything that mentions President Clinton. I want you to highlight it, and I want you to photograph it, and you need to make 75 copies, and they need to be on this desk by 5 o'clock in the morning. Okay. I had no idea what any of this meant. So I remember walking home to the dormitory, George Washington University. I was staying on campus, and I called my dad on the payphone, and I said, Dad, I think I got promoted. He goes, to what? You're an intern. And I said, well, I think I got promoted to do the president's clips. He goes, what is the president's clips? I had no idea what this was. Anyway, went to the White House press office, did that for the remainder of the semester. Loved every single moment of it. Just loved it. And the feedback that I got was like, you asked really good questions around the presidential podium and where he should stand. And I'm like, I didn't even realize that was a thing. But I did ask those questions. And then I actually made some recommendations. Kid, 18 years old, I was doing this stuff. So I went back to college that fall, and I changed my major from pre-med to political science. My parents, who are watching, were absolutely devastated. You would have thought that it was bad. It was not a good time in my household. So I transferred from MD to political science, and my parents are still regretting that decision.
Well, I think medicine's loss was his public communications gain.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Well, that was an hour that really flew by, and I'm sure that we all took things from it. I certainly will, about how we interact in our jobs and with people. So can we thank again Robert and also Neil for chairing this meeting so well.
Thank you.
And thank you all for coming, and those online. And if your parents are there, greetings from Scotland.